Hey everyone, thanks to Litter PG Reads and Paul Bello-Finefellow for sending over this fantastic article all about ruling dynasties in tabletop RPGs.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is, and it's funny, just last week my group's campaign took kind of a wild turn that really brought this whole topic home for me.
Oh, really?
We were playing in a pretty standard fantasy setting,
Mm.
slaying orcs, exploring dungeons, when suddenly, bam, we found ourselves in the middle of a full-blown succession crisis.
Whoa!
Yeah. It was crazy. We're in the capital city, just restocking on supplies, maybe looking for a side quest or two, when suddenly news hits the streets, the king is dead.
Oh, no.
And there's no heir, apparent whispers of foul play, and suddenly every noble family in the kingdom is maneuvering for power.
Sounds like a recipe for chaos.
Oh, it threw our whole game into chaos. We went from fighting goblins to navigating, courtly intrigue, trying to figure out who to trust and what role we even wanted to play in this whole power struggle.
I bet that was intense.
Oh, it was incredibly intense. And it really got me thinking about just how much depth these dynastic shifts can bring to a campaign.
I mean, absolutely. It's not just about dungeon crawling anymore. It's about grappling with the very fabric of power.
Right.
And it's something that has resonated with humans for centuries. I mean, think about it. You can draw parallels to the Roman Empire, the warring states period in China, even Game of Thrones, if you want to go there.
Yeah, it's a classic power struggle.
Ambition alliances betrayals the struggle for power. It's a timeless narrative, and that's what makes it so compelling.
Absolutely. And this article really dives into the mechanics of how you can build this into your own games. Starting with the very foundation of power. So, think about it. How have different dynasties throughout history legitimized their rule?
You have those who claim a sacred power.
Right. Tracing their lineage back to gods or legendary figures.
Exactly. Others might rely on sheer military might or control over vital resources like fertile land or valuable trade routes.
It's all about having that leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. Each of these foundations creates a unique dynamic, a different set of levers and pressures that shape how the game unfolds.
That's something that really struck me when I was reading the article. It's not just about having a king sitting on a throne. It's about the entire system of power that surrounds him or her, of course.
Oh, for sure.
And they lay out this matrix in the article. It's kind of like a dynastic toolkit, highlighting all the different ways these elements can be combined. So you've got your source of power, your traditions, your rules of succession, mix and match those, and you can create just this whole spectrum of fascinating political landscapes for your games.
Absolutely. It's a great way to think about it.
Take the concept of sacred, right? For example, the article mentions Egyptian pharaohs and medieval kings claiming divine favor, to kind of solidify their rule. But how would you actually play that out in a tabletop RPG?
Right.
Would the king be able to call down lightning bolt on his enemies, or would it be more subtle, maybe a perceived aura of holiness that influences people's perceptions?
Yeah. Or maybe some combination of the two.
Right. And how would a GM even convey that divine mandate to the players? And, more importantly, how could they challenge it if they wanted to?
Now, that's where things get really interesting. Imagine a ruler where, every decree is seen as divinely inspired.
Okay.
They could perform miracles, predict the future, or even command the elements, like you were saying.
Oh, wow.
Now, think about how that would influence your players' actions. Would they even dare to question his authority or her authority?
Right.
Would they try to expose them as a fraud or seek their own divine mandate to rival his power?
It adds a whole other dimension to the game.
Exactly. This kind of setup creates this layer of tension that goes beyond just fighting monsters. It forces your players to think about the very nature of power belief and rebellion.
That's so cool.
And the beauty of it is that there's no right or wrong answer. You can tailor it to fit your, specific campaign setting and the kinds of stories you want to tell.
Right.
So do you want to explore the corrupting influence of absolute power, or perhaps the struggle to maintain faith in the face of adversity?
Or both.
Yeah, the possibilities are honestly endless.
It really is adding a whole other dimension to the game. Suddenly even the most mundane actions like negotiating with a merchant or resolving a local dispute become infused with this undercurrent of political tension.
Absolutely.
And then there's the whole concept of noble houses, which the article really dives into.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a game within a game with all these families vying for power and influence, within that larger dynastic structure.
It's all collected.
And the article goes into detail about the different types of relationships between these houses. So we're talking about alliances, marriages, rivalries,
Right.
It's a gold mine for GMs who love political intrigue.
Oh, for sure.
You could have players caught in the middle of a feud between two powerful families. Each one's trying to use them as pawns in their game. Or maybe they have to broker a marriage alliance to prevent a war from breaking out.
Oh, that's a good one.
What's fascinating to me is how those relationships tie directly into the resources that fuel a dynasty's power. So control over land wealth armies. These are the tools that noble houses use to advance their agendas.
It's all about strategy.
And think about how you can incorporate those elements into your game. Maybe a wealthy merchant family seeks to influence trade policy, or a powerful military house wants to expand the kingdom's borders.
And remember, your players' actions can have a ripple effect on these power dynamics.
Right, like they aren't just passive observers.
Exactly. Imagine they help a struggling mining family uncover a new vein of valuable, or suddenly that family's fortunes rise, and they might challenge the established order, upsetting the delicate balance of power within the kingdom.
Things can change quickly.
They sure can.
And it doesn't have to be all about, land and gold. The article also talks about bloodline power, hereditary magic that gets passed down through a dynasty.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one.
Imagine a family where each heir inherits a unique magical ability. One might have control over fire, another might possess incredible strength, and another might be able to see the future.
So cool.
That could completely change the power dynamic within a ruling family, wouldn't it? You'd have siblings vying for the throne, not just based on, political maneuvering, but on the sheer power of their inherited abilities.
For sure.
And how would that play out in a campaign? Would those powers be used for good or for personal gain? Would they become a source of unity or division within the dynasty?
Those are great questions. And I think what I find particularly intriguing about bloodline powers is the potential for both strength and vulnerability.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So on the one hand, you have a ruler with these incredible abilities that could make them unstoppable.
Right.
But on the other hand, what happens if their power fades or is corrupted somehow?
Or someone figures out how to exploit their weakness.
Exactly. Think about the example you mentioned, the ability to see the future.
Right.
On the surface, that seems like an incredible advantage, right?
Oh.
But what if the future that you see is just bleak and unavoidable? Like every choice you make, every action you take leads to the same disastrous outcome. How would that affect a ruler's decisions?
It would be a heavy burden to bear.
Would they try to defy fate or resign themselves to the inevitable?
That's a really interesting concept to explore.
Yeah, it really adds a layer of depth to these powers.
It's not just about the power itself, it's about the burden of responsibility that comes with it.
Exactly.
And speaking of burdens, let's talk about the heart of any good dynastic campaign court intrigue. This is where all those power struggles, alliances, betrayals really come to life, and this article gives us a fantastic framework for understanding the dynamics of a royal court.
Yeah.
From the king's advisors and the courtiers to the spies and assassins lurking in the shadows. It's like a giant game of chess where every move has consequences.
And every piece has its own motivations.
Right. So imagine your players having to navigate this treacherous landscape, trying to gain favor with the right people, uncover secrets, maybe even spread a few rumors of their own. Oh, yeah. They might be tasked with exposing a traitor, negotiating a delicate treaty, or even preventing an assassination attempt.
High stakes.
And all the while, they have to be careful not to get entangled in the web of courtly intrigue themselves.
It's a dangerous game.
It is, and to play it effectively, it's all about understanding the motivations and desires of the key players in the court.
Right, who's vying for power, who's holding grudges, who's secretly pulling the strings.
And who can your players trust?
Exactly, because in a game of court intrigue, even your closest allies can turn on you in an instant.
So think about the classic roles you find in most fantasy courts. The scheming advisor, the ambitious general, the jealous sibling, the foreign dignitary with their own agenda.
Each of these characters presents an opportunity for your players to interact with the courtly system.
To forge alliances, gather information, or maybe even manipulate events to their advantage.
Oh, and let's not forget the potential for romance. A well-placed love affair or a scandalous tryst can completely upend the power dynamics of a court.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, all this intrigue can lead to some truly explosive situations. Which brings us to the topic of succession crises.
Uh-oh.
The article breaks down all these various factors that can trigger these upheavals.
Yeah.
A contested lineage. You've got political maneuvering by ambitious nobles, even external threats taking advantage of the chaos.
It's a powder keg waiting to explode.
It is. So imagine your players finding themselves right in the middle of such a crisis. The king is dead, there's no clear heir, and the realm is on the brink of civil war.
Whoa.
So do they try to remain neutral? Or do they throw their support behind a particular claimant?
Tough choice.
And what if their chosen candidate turns out to be a tyrant? Or maybe they uncover evidence that the king's death wasn't an accident. After all, suddenly they're not just adventurers anymore. They're players in this high-stakes game of power.
With the fate of an entire kingdom hanging in the balance.
Exactly. And what's particularly interesting about succession crises is that they often force your players to make these really difficult moral choices.
Right, because there's not always a clear-cut good guy and bad guy.
Exactly. The article talks about pretender claims and how not every contender for the throne is necessarily a villain.
Right. Some might have legitimate grievances or offer a better vision for the realm.
So think about how you could present those choices to your players. Maybe they have to choose between supporting a ruthless but effective ruler who can restore order or a benevolent but inexperienced heir who might struggle to hold the kingdom together.
Or perhaps they have to decide whether to expose a conspiracy that could plunge the realm into chaos, even if it means bringing down a beloved ruler.
It's all about weighing the potential consequences.
And sometimes the right choice isn't always clear-cut.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial element of dynastic power. Military might, after all, what good is a claim to the throne if you don't have the strength to back it up?
You gotta have an army.
Right. The article goes into detail about the different types of military units you might find in a fantasy setting, from basic infantry and cavalry to more specialized archers, siege weapons, even magical units.
The whole world of military possibilities.
And it really emphasizes the importance of things like loyalty systems, command chains, and the logistical challenges of maintaining a standing army.
It's not just about sending troops into battle. There's a lot of planning and organization involved.
Right. So imagine your players having to raise an army, train, recruits, secure supplies, formulate battle plans.
And they might have to deal with mutinies, desertions, or even betrayals within their own ranks.
That's all part of the challenge.
And on the battlefield, they'll have to make strategic decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat.
Life or death decisions.
And all of this, of course, ties back into the political landscape we've been discussing. Who controls the army, who funds it, and who benefits from its victory.
It's all connected.
It is.
Let's not forget the human element within the military itself. The article highlights the importance of building a robust loyalty system.
Right.
From oaths of service and merit-based rewards to more subtle forms of propaganda.
A divided army is a weak army.
And that can spell disaster for any ruler.
So think about how you could use those elements to create engaging storylines for your players.
Okay.
Perhaps they have to root out a traitor within the ranks or quell a rebellion before it spreads. Or maybe they have to win the loyalty of a powerful general who could tip the balance of power in a succession crisis.
It's all about navigating those complex relationships.
Absolutely. And then there's the question of what happens when soldiers return from war.
Right.
Are they welcomed as heroes or ostracized as traumatized veterans?
And how does their experience shape the society they return to?
It's a question worth exploring.
It is. It makes you think about all the different types of military leaders players might encounter in a game.
Yeah.
You could have the brilliant strategist, the charismatic leader who inspires their troops, the ruthless commander who wins at any cost.
Each of these archetypes could be a potential ally or enemy for the players.
Depending on their goals and actions.
Right. And speaking of potential allies and enemies, the article dives into the role of elite guards, those highly trained warriors who serve as both protectors and enforcers for the ruling dynasty.
They're often depicted as fiercely loyal, skilled in combat, and privy to secrets that could topple kingdoms.
They're a fascinating element to include in a dynastic campaign.
So how would you incorporate them into a game?
Well, elite guards are such a rich source of storytelling potential. I mean, they can be the unwavering protectors of the realm, the iron fist of a tyrannical ruler, or even the instigators of a coup d'etat.
Whoa, they could go either way.
Exactly. And think about how their loyalty might be tested or their skills pushed to the limit, or how their role in court intrigue could be paramount.
They could have hidden agendas?
Perhaps they're tasked with hunting down a fugitive, protecting a valuable artifact, or even eliminating a rival claimant to the throne.
Sounds dangerous.
Oh, it can be. And their presence raises so many interesting questions for your players. Can they trust the elite guards?
Right.
Do they have their own agendas? And what happens when their orders conflict with the player's own moral compass?
Do they follow orders, even if it means doing something they believe is wrong? Or do they break their oaths and risk the consequences?
Those are tough choices.
It's all about navigating those moral dilemmas.
Which is what makes dynastic campaigns so compelling.
And it's not just about brute force, either. The article also emphasizes the importance of economic control for any successful dynasty. After all, you need resources to maintain an army fund, construction projects, and appease your subjects.
It's all about the money, honey.
So it's not just about collecting taxes, it's about understanding the intricacies of trade regulations, resource management, and even things like currency manipulation.
A wise ruler understands that economic stability is just as important as military strength.
And a prosperous realm is a stable realm.
And that's where things get really interesting for your players. Imagine a campaign where they're not just adventurers, but also economic advisors, diplomats, or even merchants themselves.
Okay.
They might be tasked with negotiating trade agreements, securing valuable resources, or even manipulating markets to their advantage.
Talk about high stakes.
And think about the potential for conflict. What happens when a trade war erupts between two rival kingdoms?
Oh.
Or when a valuable resource is discovered that could upset the balance of power? Or when a currency crisis threatens to destabilize the entire realm.
That could have a ripple effect throughout the whole kingdom.
These are all scenarios that could have a profound impact on your campaign and create engaging challenges for your players to overcome.
Absolutely. And those challenges often extend beyond the borders of a single kingdom, right?
Oh, for sure.
The article talks about trade networks being the veins and arteries of a realm's economy, but they also serve as conduits for cultural exchange, the spread of ideas, even the flow of information.
Think about the Silk Road, for example.
Right, and how it connected these vast empires, facilitated the exchange of goods and knowledge, and even helped spread religious beliefs.
It was a major force in shaping history.
So imagine a campaign where your players are traveling along these trade routes, encountering merchants from distant lands, learning about new cultures, and maybe even getting caught up in international intrigue.
That would be amazing.
They might stumble upon a conspiracy to sabotage a trade agreement, or uncover a plot to smuggle illegal goods across borders, or maybe they'll even have the opportunity to establish their own trading company and build a financial empire.
It's a great way to introduce elements of exoticism and wonder into your campaign. Imagine a caravan arriving from a far-off land bearing strange spices, silks, and tales of mythical creatures. Or perhaps a map surfaces detailing a lost city rumored to be filled with unimaginable treasures.
It's like opening a whole new world of possibilities. Suddenly, the campaign isn't just confined to a single kingdom or region. It's connected to this vast network of interconnected societies, each with their own customs, beliefs, and agendas.
Absolutely.
And speaking of beliefs, let's not forget the role of religious authority in shaping dynastic power in many fantasy settings. Faith plays a significant role in people's lives, influencing their values, their laws, and even their political allegiances.
It can be a powerful unifying force.
And the article touches on all the different types of clergy, the complexities of temple politics, and the potential impact of divine signs and interventions.
It's a rich area to explore.
It is. Religion can be a powerful force in any society, and it can be used to both support and challenge the ruling dynasty.
Exactly. Imagine a high priest who wields more influence than the king, or a prophecy that foretells the downfall of the current regime, or perhaps a new religious movement emerges that challenges the traditional beliefs and threatens to destabilize the kingdom.
It could really shake things up.
It could. And think about how these religious elements could play out in your campaign. Perhaps your players have to negotiate a delicate truce between warring factions with different religious beliefs.
Okay.
Or maybe they uncover a plot by a heretical cult to assassinate the king and install their own puppet ruler. Or perhaps they even have to confront their own faith when faced with a moral dilemma that challenges their deeply held convictions.
It adds another layer of complexity to the decision-making process, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Suddenly, it's not just about what's politically expedient or strategically advantageous. It's also about what aligns with your character's beliefs and values.
Exactly.
And that can lead to some really interesting internal conflicts and role-playing opportunities.
It's all about those personal struggles.
And those conflicts often spill over into the realm of international relations, which the article addresses through the lens of diplomatic relations and foreign policy. It highlights the different approaches a dynasty can take toward its neighbors, whether it's isolationism, expansionism, or maintaining a delicate balance of power.
It's a complex game of alliances and rivalries.
And each of those approaches comes with its own set of risks and rewards, both for the ruling dynasty and for the players who get caught up in the machinations.
For sure. So imagine a campaign where your players are acting as diplomats, trying to negotiate treaties, secure alliances, or even avert war.
Okay.
They might have to navigate cultural differences, political intrigue, and personal biases to find common ground and achieve their objectives.
It sounds like a tough job.
It can be. And think about the challenges they might face. What happens when negotiations break down, or when a treaty is violated, or when a foreign power tries to interfere in your kingdom's internal affairs?
That could escalate quickly.
It could. And these are all situations that could lead to conflict and force your players to make difficult choices that could have far-reaching consequences.
And those consequences often play out on a grand scale, right? We've been talking about all the intricacies of dynastic power. But what happens when that power is challenged from within the article? Spend some time discussing revolution mechanics, breaking down all the factors that can lead to an uprising.
Like oppression.
Economic hardship, ideological movements.
Even the perception of weakness or incompetence on the part of the ruling class.
Right. It's a reminder that even the most powerful dynasties are not invincible, and that the seeds of their destruction often lie within their own societies.
It's a classic tale of hubris and downfall.
So imagine your players finding themselves in a kingdom on the brink of revolution. Do they side with the rebels fighting for freedom and justice? Or do they defend the established order, trying to maintain stability, even if it means perpetuating injustice?
Or maybe they try to find a third way, brokering a peace or advocating for reform that could avert a bloody conflict?
It's a scenario that's ripe with moral dilemmas and opportunities for dramatic storytelling.
Revolutions are inherently chaotic and unpredictable, and they can lead to both positive and negative outcomes. A successful revolution can overthrow a tyrant and usher in a new era of freedom and prosperity.
But it could also backfire.
It could lead to further instability, violence, and even the rise of a new, even more oppressive regime. The article encourages GMs to consider the complexities of revolutions and to avoid simplistic good versus evil narratives.
Right, it's not always black and white.
Instead, focus on the human element, the motivations of the rebels, the fears of the ruling class, and the impact of the conflict on ordinary people.
Those are the stories that really resonate.
Yeah. They are. And think about how your players might influence the course of the revolution. Are they leaders inspiring the masses to rise up against their oppressors?
Right. Are they strategists planning military campaigns and forging alliances?
Or are they simply caught in the crossfire, struggling to survive as the world around them collapses?
No matter their role, their choices and actions can shape the outcome of the revolution and determine the fate of the kingdom.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It's a reminder that even in a game of fantasy and adventure, real-world issues like social justice, political reform, and the consequences of violence can have a profound impact on the narrative.
Absolutely.
And it challenges players to think critically about their own beliefs and values and how they would act in situations where there are no easy answers.
It's about making those tough choices.
But let's not lose sight of the fact that even in the midst of revolution, there's a fundamental element of dynastic power that can't be ignored. Popular support.
Right. The people's will.
No matter how powerful a ruler might be, they ultimately derive their legitimacy from the people they govern.
The power of the people is not to be underestimated.
And the article emphasizes the importance of popular support, highlighting the ways rulers can build trust and loyalty through social reforms, public ceremonies, addressing grievances, and even simply being seen as a fair and just leader.
It's about connecting with the people, showing that you care about their well-being.
And conversely, the loss of popular support can be a death knell for a dynasty.
Oh, for sure.
When people lose faith in their leaders, when they feel unheard or mistreated, the seeds of discontent are sown.
It's a slippery slope.
So think about how you could represent this in your campaign. Maybe there's a growing sense of unrest amongst the peasantry, fueled by high taxes, corruption, or a lack of basic necessities.
Or perhaps a charismatic leader emerges who rallies the people against the ruling dynasty, promising a better future.
A new hope.
How do your players react to this growing discontent? Do they try to address the underlying issues, or do they resort to repression and violence to maintain control?
And how do their choices affect the overall stability of the kingdom?
It's a delicate balancing act.
It's a reminder that even in a fantasy setting, the people have a voice, and that their opinions and actions can have a profound impact on the course of events.
The people are the foundation of any kingdom.
Exactly. And all of this ultimately leads to the final concept we'll discuss today, dynasty legacy.
Okay.
It's about more than just who sits on the throne at any given moment. It's about the lasting impact a ruling family has on their kingdom their people, and the world around them.
It's about leaving your mark on history.
And the article explores the various aspects of legacy, the achievements, monuments laws, cultural values, and stories that are passed down through generations.
It's about shaping the future.
And it challenges GMs and players alike to think about the legacy they want to create in their campaigns.
What do you want to be remembered for?
So think about your players' characters. What do they want to be remembered for? Are they heroes who saved the kingdom from tyranny, visionary leaders who ushered in a new era of prosperity, or perhaps they're more interested in personal gain, seeking to amass wealth and power for themselves?
No matter their goals, their actions will have consequences that will ripple through the campaign world long after they're gone.
That's heavy thought.
It is. But that's what makes dynastic campaigns so compelling. They're about more than just fighting monsters and collecting loot. They're about shaping the very fabric of a world and leaving behind a legacy that will be remembered for generations to come.
That's a powerful concept.
It is, and it's one that I think we'll be exploring in more detail in our next part.
I can't wait.
And that brings us to a fascinating point. How do you actually weave these grand sweeping ideas into a playable game?
Yeah.
You've got these epic themes of power, legacy, revolution, but how do you translate that to something your players can engage with on a, session by session basis?
That's the million gold piece question, isn't it? And I love how this article doesn't just leave us hanging with these abstract concepts,
Right.
It gives us some real practical tools to work with.
Exactly. For instance, one thing it dives into is how to use magic to really spice up a dynastic campaign.
Okay.
We've touched on hereditary powers. Right. Yeah. But there's also the broader question of how magic affects society as a whole.
Okay, so let's picture this.
Yeah.
We're in a kingdom where magic isn't just for wizards and towers.
Mm-hmm.
It's woven into everyday life.
Okay.
It powers the street lamps, maybe even public transportation healers, use it in hospitals.
Right. Like a magical infrastructure?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now think about the implications for your players. Suddenly, a simple investigation might involve tracking down a rogue mage whose faulty enchantments are causing citywide blackouts.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or maybe a powerful magical artifact crucial to the kingdom's defense has been stolen.
Now we're talking.
And it's not just about the adventuring side of things, right?
Right.
Magic would have huge political and economic ramifications.
Absolutely.
Who controls the sources of magical energy? Are there guilds or monopolies that regulate its use?
That's where things get juicy.
Right.
Imagine a merchant guild that controls the import of rare magical components.
Okay.
They could hold immense sway over the kingdom's economy, even influencing foreign policy. Your players might find themselves caught in a web of intrigue as they try to break the guild's monopoly or expose their corrupt practices.
That's a great campaign hook.
It is.
And then there's the legal angle. If magic is commonplace, how does it affect the justice system?
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Do you need magically enhanced truth serums? What about enchanted contracts?
Those are fantastic questions, and they can spark so much creativity.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a whole new class of lawyers who specialize in magical law.
Oh, wow.
And your players have to hire one to navigate a complex inheritance dispute where the will itself is magically binding. Or perhaps they have to prove their innocence in a magical crime where illusion and deception blur the lines between truth and falsehood.
Oh, that's so cool. This is making my brain buzz with ideas.
I know, right?
And speaking of things that spark the imagination, the article also talks about the importance of historical records in a dynastic campaign.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You're dealing with generations of rulers, family trees, ancient prophecies.
It's all about the weight of history.
Exactly, and having detailed records.
Yeah.
So like timelines, family trees, maps of shifting borders.
It just adds so much depth.
It doesn't just add realism, it gives you endless hooks for adventure.
Absolutely.
Imagine your players uncovering a dusty scroll that hints at a secret pact made centuries ago between the ruling dynasty and a powerful dragon.
Ooh, I like that.
Or maybe they discover a hidden chamber containing the diary of a long-dead queen filled with scandalous secrets that could topple the current regime.
The possibilities are endless.
And don't forget the power of legends and rumors.
Oh, yeah, those are always fun.
A well-placed whisper about a cursed artifact, a lost city, or a prophecy of doom can send your players off on a wild goose chase that could lead them to all sorts of unexpected discoveries and challenges.
It's all about sparking their curiosity.
Okay, I'm totally sold on the value of good record keeping now. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's essential to any good campaign combat.
Yeah.
How do dynastic shifts and power struggles affect the way battles are fought and who's involved?
That's where the whole concept of military might comes into play. We've talked about different unit types
Right.
and the importance of loyalty.
Right.
But think about how those factors change depending on the specific conflict.
So a battle during a full-blown civil war is going to feel very different from a skirmish against bandits.
Right. Oh, absolutely. The scale, the stakes, the types of units involved, it all shifts.
So in a civil war, you might see armies clashing on open fields with siege engines pounding at city walls.
Right. You'll have noble houses bringing their own levies and knights to the fight, maybe even mercenaries and magical beasts thrown into the mix.
It's a whole different level of warfare.
And then there's the question of tactics. Are the rebels using guerrilla warfare, striking from the shadows? Is the ruling dynasty relying on overwhelming force?
It's all about adapting to the situation.
And those choices reflect the political realities of the conflict.
And don't forget the psychological impact of war on your players' characters fighting against their own countrymen, maybe even friends or family members, can be a truly harrowing experience.
They can really test their loyalties.
The moral dilemmas they face, the potential for betrayal and loss, it adds a whole new level of depth to combat encounters.
It's not just about swinging swords anymore.
And speaking of moral dilemmas, let's talk about the role of those elite guards. Again, we've established they can be key players in court intrigue, but how might they act on the battlefield?
Okay, so imagine this. Your players are leading a charge against a rebel stronghold.
Okay.
Suddenly, they encounter a unit of the king's elite guard defending it.
Oh.
Do they attack? Do they try to negotiate? Do they suspect treachery within the ranks of the guard itself?
Talk about a tense situation.
It is, and it's not just about tactical choices. It's about those personal relationships and loyalties we've been discussing. Maybe one of the players has a close friend or mentor among the elite guard, and now they have to choose between their duty and their personal connections.
It's a classic conflict of loyalty.
And those choices will have repercussions both on the battlefield and in the wider political landscape. Will they be seen as heroes for crushing the rebellion or as traitors for siding with the enemy?
It's all about navigating those shades of gray, which is what makes dynastic campaigns so compelling. And let's not forget the economic side of things.
Right.
We talked about how trade networks and resource management can be used to create intrigue and challenges.
Yeah.
But they also play a crucial role in warfare.
Absolutely. Wars are expensive both in terms of money and resources. Armies need to be equipped, fed, and paid. Siege engines require vast amounts of lumber and metal, and trade routes can be disrupted, leading to shortages and inflation.
So a clever ruler might try to cripple their enemies economically before even engaging in open warfare.
Right. They might impose embargoes, sabotage trade routes, or even manipulate currency exchange rates.
And those actions could have unforeseen consequences for your players.
For sure.
Maybe they're merchants who suddenly find themselves caught in the middle of a trade war.
Or their investments are wiped out by a sudden economic downturn.
Or perhaps they're tasked with finding a way to break the enemy's economic stranglehold, maybe by establishing new trade routes or securing access to vital resources.
It's all about thinking outside the box.
You know, this whole discussion has really highlighted the interconnectedness of everything in a dynastic campaign. Military might, economic power, social unrest, religious beliefs.
It's all connected.
It all feeds into this complex web of cause and effect.
And that's what makes it so rewarding for both GMs and players. You're not just telling a story, you're creating a living, breathing world with its own history, culture, and internal logic.
And within that world, your players have the agency to make choices that can have a real impact, not just on their own destinies, but on the fate of entire kingdoms and generations to come.
And speaking of impact, let's not forget the role of religion in times of war. Faith can be a powerful motivator, both for good and for ill. It can inspire soldiers to fight for a righteous cause.
But it can also be used to justify atrocities.
Exactly, and demonize the enemy.
Think about the Crusades, for example, or the religious wars that have ravaged Europe throughout history. Faith can be a double-edged sword capable of uniting people under a common banner, but also dividing them along ideological lines.
It's a complex and often dangerous force.
And in a dynastic campaign, those religious tensions can add a whole new layer of complexity to conflicts.
For sure.
Imagine a kingdom where the ruling dynasty claims divine right, but a powerful religious sect challenges their authority, perhaps even supporting a rival claimant to the throne.
That's a recipe for a holy war.
And how do your players navigate that? Do they side with the established church, even if they doubt the king's piety? Do they support the reformers, even if it means risking religious persecution? Or do they try to find a way to bridge the divide and prevent a bloody conflict?
That's a tough call.
These are the kinds of questions that can really make your players think about the role of faith in society, the nature of power, and the limits of tolerance and understanding in their choices can have far-reaching consequences shaping the religious landscape of your world for generations to come.
It's about understanding the power of belief.
And it's like we've been saying throughout this whole deep dive, every action, every decision has the potential to ripple outward, affecting not just individuals, but the very fabric of the kingdom. And those ripples extend beyond the kingdom's borders as well, right? We talked about diplomatic relations and foreign policy. But what happens when those efforts fail?
Well, that's when things can escalate quickly, leading to skirmishes, proxy wars, and even full-blown invasions. Imagine a neighboring kingdom seeing your player's kingdom weakened by internal strife and deciding to seize the opportunity to expand their own territory.
Right, or maybe a foreign power is secretly funding the rebels, hoping to destabilize the kingdom and install a puppet ruler who will be more favorable to their interests.
Suddenly, what started as a local conflict becomes entangled in a web of international intrigue, with multiple factions vying for power and influence.
And your players might find themselves caught in the middle, forced to choose sides or try to navigate a treacherous path of neutrality.
Do they defend their homeland against foreign invaders, even if it means supporting a corrupt regime?
Do they ally with the rebels, even if it means risking the wrath of a powerful empire?
Or do they try to broker a peace knowing that any agreement will likely involve compromises and concessions?
It's those tough choices, those moments where there are no easy answers that make dynastic campaigns so captivating. And it's the lasting consequences of those choices, the way they shape the world and echo through generations, that make these stories truly epic in scope.
And let's bring it back to something we discussed earlier, popular support even in a war with external forces. A ruler can't ignore what's happening at home. A kingdom divided against itself can't stand, as they say.
Absolutely. Imagine your players are advising the king on how to handle a foreign threat.
Okay.
Do they recommend raising taxes to fund the war effort, even if it risks alienating the populace?
Do they impose conscription, forcing citizens into military service, even if it leads to resentment and unrest?
Or do they seek alternative solutions, perhaps appealing to allied nations, for aid negotiating a temporary truce, or even making concessions to appease the aggressor?
These choices will have a direct impact on popular support.
Right. And a ruler who loses the faith of their people risks not only losing the war, but also losing their throne.
It's a high-stakes gamble.
It is. It's a reminder that even in the most dire of circumstances, a wise ruler understands the importance of maintaining a strong connection with their people, of addressing their grievances, and of inspiring their loyalty.
It's about leadership.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the concept of legacy. What kind of legacy does a ruler want to leave behind? A legacy of conquest and military glory, a legacy of peace and prosperity, or perhaps a legacy of justice and social reform?
Those are some big questions to grapple with. And it's not just about individual rulers either, right? It's about the legacy of entire dynasties, that the way their actions shape the world for generations to come.
Think about the Roman Empire, for example. Their legacy is still felt today in our laws, our languages, our architecture, and even though the empire itself has long since crumbled, their impact on the world is undeniable.
It's a powerful reminder of the enduring nature of legacy.
And in a dynastic campaign, your players have the opportunity to shape that legacy, to leave their mark on the world. They might not be kings or queens themselves, but their actions can influence the course of history, topple tyrants, spark revolutions, and usher in new eras of peace and prosperity.
It's about making a difference.
And that's what makes this type of campaign so engaging. It's not just about individual characters, it's about the grand sweep of history, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the lasting impact of our choices.
And it's a reminder that even in a game of fantasy imagination, the themes of power, legacy, and the struggle for a better future are timeless and universally relevant.
So as you're designing your own dynastic campaigns, I encourage you to think big, to embrace the complexity, and to give your players the freedom to shape the world in meaningful and lasting ways.
It's all about creating those unforgettable gaming experiences.
Wow, this deep dive has been really something else.
Lots to unpack.
So much to think about. And I'm already kind of itching to get back to my campaign and start incorporating some of these ideas.
That's the spirit.
You give me so much inspiration.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, we've only just scratched the surface here.
I know, right?
The article goes into even more detail on things like designing, compelling campaign settings, creating memorable NPCs,
right,
and even handling large-scale conflicts like civil wars and revolutions.
It's a treasure trove of inspiration for any GM who really wants to take their dynastic campaigns to the next level.
It really is.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked about all these grand concepts, power, legacy, the fate of kingdoms. But what about the personal stories that unfold within those larger narratives?
That's what really brings these campaigns to life. It's about, those moments of individual heroism, those acts of sacrifice, those betrayals that cut deep, those triumphs that resonate through generations.
So here's the question for you, dear listeners. What's the most memorable personal story you've experienced in a dynastic campaign?
I'm curious to hear.
Maybe it was a moment of, a heart-wrenching betrayal, a daring act of defiance against tyranny, or a tale of love and loss that spanned generations.
Those are the stories that stick with you.
Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how these themes have played out at your tables and what lasting impact they've had on your characters and your campaigns.
And if you're feeling inspired to delve deeper into the world of dynastic RPGs, I highly recommend checking out the full article on Lit RPG Reads.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
It's packed with insights, advice, and practical tools that can help you create truly unforgettable gaming experiences.
A huge thanks again to Paul Bello, Fine Fellow, for sharing his expertise and passion for this fascinating topic.
He's a great guy.
And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
Happy gaming.